In this video, we're going to take a look at using filters and generators to create more complex materials. So now we're going to pick up where we left off in part 1, and I'm going to continue working on this color 01 layer group. So what I'd like to do is to create an edgewear effect. And right now what we have is this single layer, and we're working on what is going to represent a metal material. And so this layer represents the painted coating layer. And so let me just rename this layer so it makes more sense. So I'm going to call this paint coating. And then what I'm going to do here from my shelf on the materials, I'm going to do a search. I'll type in iron, and we have this material preset I'm going to use called iron galvanized. So I'm going to left click and drag and drop this here to the color 01 layer group. And you can see that I've placed this above the paint coating. So now here in the properties, I'm going to set a few of these settings. So for the metal color, if I click this here, I want to come over to my value slider, and I'm going to set this to a value of 0.6. So we'll type in 0.6 and hit enter. Now for my roughness, I'm going to set this to a value of 0.5. And then we have this finish category. So let me just expand this. And for the scale, I'm going to set this to a value of 11. And the flake intensity, you can see these flakes here. We're going to keep this pretty small. So I'm going to set this to 0.07. And there we go. So now we have this metal layer. And I need to mask this metal layer so that it only appears on the edges of the mesh. So to do that, we're going to use a mask. So with the layer selected, I'll come over here to my mask, and I'm going to choose to add a black mask. So here I can see that the mask is selected. So I'm going to come over to Add Effect, and then here I'm going to choose to add a generator. A generator is an effect that helps me to generate or produce a mask. So with the generator selected, I'm going to click the button, and you can see it's already filtering for generators. And the one that I want to work with here is called Metal Edge Wear. So here I'm just going to left click to apply the Metal Edge Wear generator. So if I zoom in on this area of the mesh, you can see here on the edges that it's producing this edge wear effect. And like I said, the generator is producing a mask. So if I hold down the Alt key and I left click here on the mask, here's exactly what it's producing for me. So like I said, generators are going to help me create this mask in a procedural way. Okay, so let's hit the M key on the keyboard to go back to the material mode, and let's make a few changes to this generator. So if I just select the generator, I have a host of properties, things like my edge wear that I can just dial up and down. So in this case, for the wear level, I'm going to set this to a value of, say, 0.83. And then I have my contrast here. So I'm going to set the contrast to 0.75. And then for the grunge amount, we're going to set this to a value of 0.32. Okay, so this is going to produce the edge wear. Here on the lenses, you can see it's producing this cool edge wear effect. And this is going to basically close out this color 01 material group. Now, up into this stage, all we've been doing is working on the body texture set. But I'd like to also start applying these materials to the legs as well. So I'm going to show you a very cool way to do that by instantiating our layers. So what I can do here, you can see that I have these two layers. They're made up of different masks. They have some filters and generators applied, and they're all housed within this layer group. So I can actually instantiate any layer, but in this case, I'm going to instantiate a group of layers. So with the layer here, if I just right click, I get this menu that allows me to do things like copy layer and paste layer. But we have this option here called instantiate across texture sets. And this is the option I want to use. So I'll left click here, and I can see that I get this dialog, and it automatically selects my legs here for me, which just happens to be the only other texture set that I have. So what I'm going to do is just click OK, and we've added this material that we've been working on to the legs texture set. And you'll notice that it's already been masked or placed in a very specific location. Now this location, again, is driven by that ID. So here, let's take a look. If we recall here that we had our layer group and we masked this layer group, and if we take a look at our color selection, we did so using our ID and we chose that green value. That's how we were able to mask. Now, if I click the drop down here and I take a look at the overall ID map, you can see that the legs texture set also has the green IDs. So when we instantiate the layer that's using that particular ID through the color selection, it updates on the legs texture set as well. And this also shows why I went through that step of using the ID map. It really just helps you to quickly speed up your texturing process. So here again, I'll hit the M key on the keyboard to go back to my material mode. Now we'll notice that my layer group here has an icon that lets me know that, well, this has been instantiated. If I left click on this icon, I can see here the instance hierarchy. So we have our body and the color 01 layer group. And then below that, we can see that it's been instanced to the legs. If I left click on this legs instance, it will quickly select the texture set for my legs. And here I can see that I have this instance layer. Now I can't edit this layer because it's an instance. But if I go and start to make any changes, these changes are going to update across all of the instanced layers. So for example, we instance the entire group. So any layers that we change within this group are going to automatically update. Here's a quick example. If we jump over to the paint coding, and let's say we change this to a blue value, you can see that it updates the body and the legs. Here, I'll undo this. And again, if we jump back over here to the metal edgewear, and I have my wear level, if I start to maybe decrease the wear level, you can see that it updates on both the body and the legs. Again, because this layer is part of my layer group that is instanced. So for this project, I'm working with a two-tone color scheme for the robot. I already have this color 01, so I'm just going to reuse what I have. So I can right-click the layer and choose copy, and then right-click again and choose paste layers. Now, I'm going to rename this to color 02. Let's get the masking set correctly before we do any other tweaks to the layers. So I'm going to select the mask, go to color selection, and I'm going to click the remove button to remove the ID. Then I'm going to click pick color, and I'm going to choose this blue. So now I have this layer group masked to the appropriate ID. Next, I'll expand the group. Let's come over to our painted coding, and then I'm just simply going to change the base color value. So just as we did for color 01, I'm going to use one of the swatches from my swatches PNG file, and I'm going to choose this turquoise color value. So let me just move this over to my other monitor. I will click the color swatch. Let's use the eyedropper, left click and drag. I'm going to select the color from the swatches, and there we go. So now I have this color 02 set and ready to go. So next, I'd like to start adding additional materials here to my layer stack. Let's start here by working on a rubber material. So from the shelf, I'm going to jump over here to the materials category, and I'm going to do a search here for plastic. And the one that I'm going to work with to start is going to be this plastic matte pure. Now, instead of just dragging this to the layer stack and then setting up a mask, I'm going to show you a nice shortcut to quickly apply this material directly to an ID in the 3D view. So to do that, we just simply hold down the control key, left click and drag the material, and just hover it over the 3D view. With the control key held down, you can see that the ID map automatically appears, and then I could literally drag and drop this material to one of the IDs. So I'm going to drop it on this turquoise ID here. Now you can see what happens. The fill layer is created in the layer stack. A mask was created for me automatically with the color selection added, and the correct ID here is chosen as the pick color. So now all I need to do is jump over to the fill layer, and let's just switch the color. So I'm going to select the base color, and then I'm going to drop this saturation all the way here down to 0, and then I'm going to set the value to 0.032. All right, so for my roughness setting, what I'm going to do is set this to a value of 0.3, and that's going to basically take care of the layer. Let's go ahead and rename it. So I'll call this rubber, and now I want to instantiate this over to my legs texture set. So you can see we have this rubber applied on the body. So if I just right click, choose instantiate across texture sets, the legs is selected, and let's click OK. So here on the legs, you can see that the material has been copied to the rubber hoses, which contain that same turquoise color ID that I used on the body. And that'll take care of the rubber. So now let's take a look at creating just a metal material. So what I'm going to do now is jump back over to my shelf, kind of the same process. We're going to do a search. I'll type in iron, and I'm going to use this iron galvanized once again. I'm going to use the same keyboard shortcut, hold down Control, left click and drag into the 3D view, and I'm going to drop this material on this yellow ID. So here you can see once again, a fill layer was created, a mask was added, color selection set to the pick color ID that I chose in the 3D view. So now it's jump back to the fill layer, and let's just set up the material. So here I'm going to click this metal color option. And I'm going to set the value here to 0.45. And for the roughness, we're going to set this to 0.45. And we'll zoom in a little bit closer because now I want to expand the finish section here, and we're going to change the scale. So let's set this scale to a value of 17. And then I'm just going to slightly change the flakes intensity. I'm going to use a value of 0.18. And there we go. We have that metal material. Okay, so let's right click and choose instantiate across texture sets. The legs is selected. We'll click OK. And then here, if we take a look, you can see that the legs now has that material for the metal. Again, it's based on my ID map having that same yellow value. So here, if we take a look at the ID, you can see the metal was masked using this yellow ID. So now we're going to create a coated metal. This is going to take a few layers. So I'm going to start by creating a layer group, and we'll call this coated metal. Now, here I'm going to come over to my shelf in the materials. Let's do a search, and we're going to start with plastic. And this time I'm going to use this plastic grainy preset. So let's left click, drag and drop this here to the coated metal layer group folder. I'm going to go ahead and mask. So let me select the coated metal layer group. I'm going to choose my add mask and add mask with color selection. Here I'll choose the pick color, and I'm going to choose this red ID value here. So now if we zoom in, you can see the material layer group is masked. Let's jump back to plastic grainy and make a few changes. So here in the properties fill, I'm going to set the projection mode to triplanar, and then I'm going to set the scale to a value of 6. So I'm also going to apply this coated metal to the legs. So now I'm going to instantiate this layer group so I can more clearly see how this material is working on the body and the legs at the same time. So let's right click the layer group and choose instantiate across sets. We have the legs selected, and I'll click OK. All right, so now we can see the coated metal applied to both the legs as well as the body. All right, so I also want to produce some metal edgewear. And since I already did that on the body, I can actually reuse some of the layers I already have. So let's do that. Let's come over here to our layer stack, and we can expand here this color 01. And as you'll recall, we had this iron galvanized layer where we used this metal edgewear. Let's just reuse this. So I'm just going to right click on the layer and choose copy layers. Here at the top where I have that plastic grainy, I'm going to select this and then just hit Control V or paste layers. That will paste the layer above the layer I had selected. I'm going to select the metal edgewear generator, and then I'm just going to change the properties here. So let's come over to the wear level, and I'm going to set this to a value of 0.6. And then for the grunge amount, I'm going to set this to 0.74. And there we go. That'll take care of this coated metal, which is comprised of these two layers. We have the plastic grainy and the iron galvanized for that edgewear. And I've already instantiated that across to my legs. Next, I would like to create a dirt material. And this dirt material is going to help just bring out a little more depth in our materials, as well as unify all the surfaces and the parts. So let's start here by coming up to our layer stack. I'm in the body texture set, and I'm going to create a fill layer. And let's name this dirt. And then what I'm going to do is just set up the base color. So let's just click the color swatch, and I'm going to choose just like a light brown value, maybe something like this here. And then for the roughness, I'm going to set this to a value of 0.7. And this is going to represent the dirt material. Now, I need to mask this material. So I'm going to come over here to the mask button, and I'm going to choose to add a black mask. With the mask selected, I'm going to click Add Effect and then choose to add a generator. Now we have a generator that's perfect for this effect. So if we click this button, I'm going to choose to add this dirt generator here. So I'll click the generator, and now we already have dirt you can see appearing on the surface. And because we're using this dirt generator, you can see the dirt is collecting in all these occluded areas, which is pretty nice. Now, again, just like all the generators, this is actually powered by or using the image inputs to produce these effects based on the mesh data that we baked when we first created our project. So now we can just simply scroll up to the parameters and set a few of these values. So for the dirt level, I'm going to set this to a value of 0.65. Then for the dirt contrast, I'll set this to 0.37. And for the grunge amount, we're going to set this to a value of 0.53 and hit enter. So this is going to give us this overall base dirt. Now, we have just a single effect here that's generating our mask. However, we can add additional effects to build even more complex masks. So what we're going to do is select the mask. Then I'm going to come over to my add effect and I'm going to choose to add a fill. This is going to allow me to set a grunge map as this grayscale uniform color. So I'll click the button, and here in the resources, I'm going to do a search for grunge, dirt, and I'll start to type in scratched, and then we're going to go with this option here. You can see it's called grunge, dirt, scratched. So to apply this, I just simply left click, and now we have this grunge map applied. I'm going to come over here to the fill properties by just clicking this tab, and then I'm going to set the projection mode to triplanar. As I said before, this allows us to take this 2D procedural noise and project it in 3D space. The main benefit is that we won't get any seams, and it uniformly applies this procedural over our mesh. But we need to make some changes as well, so let's go ahead and set our scale here to a value of, say, 2. And then I'm going to play around with the balance, so I'm going to set this to 0.77, and this is the result I'm going to start with. Now, you'll notice we have one issue, is that we have this grunge dirt scratch, and it's over top the dirt, and it's completely overriding what we did previously with that dirt generator. So if I turn it off, you can see this was the dirt, and now this new grunge dirt scratched procedural is overriding everything. However, we can use these blending modes to combine these layers to, like I said, produce that more complex result. So I'm going to come over to the blend mode, and I'm going to switch this to multiply. So now what we're getting is a nice combination of these two different effects. Here, let's zoom in pretty close and you can see what's happening. So here's what we had before. And now with the grunge map set to multiply, you can see that it's cutting into the result of that dirt generator and producing a more varied result. You can really see it breaking up over here. So if we take a look, if I turn off the grunge map, we have this uniform distribution. Now, if we enable the grunge map, that's set to multiply, and now we get this kind of more varied result. We still have dirt collecting in those occluded areas, but it's being broken up by that grunge map. This gives us a nice way to combine multiple layers to produce more complex masks. So now what we want to do, of course, is instantiate this dirt layer to the legs. So we'll simply select the layer, right-click, instantiate across texture sets, and then click OK. And here we go. We now have our dirt. So you can see how this really starts to help unify all the parts together, as well as add a bit more depth to our surface. So here's what we had before. You can see it looks a bit too clean, a bit too saturated, and now we get something that's a bit more realistic. Next up, I'm going to tackle the lens material. So I'm going to start this with the fill layer as well. So here I'm going to select my coated metal and click the Add Fill Layer button. That just places the fill above the layer I had selected. I also want to make sure that this layer is below the dirt. The dirt is going to be my topmost layer. So here I'll double click and I'm going to call this lens, and I'm going to go ahead and just set up my mask. So let's go to add mask, mask with color selection. I'll use my pick color and I'm going to choose the pink ID, and there we have our mask. Now let's just set up the material. So we'll come over here to the material properties, and for the base color, I'm going to set a value of 0.018. And then I'm going to set the roughness to 0.25. And that'll take care of the lens material. So the last thing I want to do is add a little color variation to this color 01. So I'm going to scroll down and expand the color 01 layer group. And here I have paint coating. This is representing the core color value. So I'm going to right click and I'm going to duplicate this layer, and I'm going to rename this to color shift. So I'm going to do just a little color shift here. So with the layer selected, I will go to Add Effect, and I'm going to add a filter. Let's click the filter button, and here I'm going to grab the HSL filter, and then I'm going to set the saturation and lightness. So for the saturation, we're going to set this to 0.336, and for the lightness, we'll set this here to 0.316. And so now I've made a change here based on this filter. So I want to mask this. And what I'd like to do is have this color shift be more apparent towards the top and kind of fall off using a linear gradient from top to bottom. And I can do that by using a generator. So let's select the layer. I'm going to go to Add Black Mask. With the mask selected, we will go to Add Effect, Add Generator. Here I'll click the Generator button, and I'm going to use this Position Generator. So left click to add the generator. Now you'll notice that this generator is using my image inputs, my position and world space normals. These again are the maps that I baked at the very beginning of my project. Again, you can see how useful these maps are to help aid in the texturing process. So we're starting to get a shift here from the top to bottom, but I'm just going to make a change here to the global balance. So I'm going to set this to a value of 0.4, and for the contrast, I will use 0.45. So here we have this color shift more apparent towards the top, and then we have this fall off. If we take a look at the mask that's being generated by the position generator, so here I will Alt left click on the mask, we get this position gradient. Okay, so I'll hit M key to go back to my material mode, and that is going to close out the work that we want to do in this second part. So now I would recommend that you take some time to explore creating various materials, working with masks, and just exploring some of the techniques that we covered in this lesson. And when you're ready, join me in part 3.